Hey gardeners, did you know that one of the most important management practices in any landscape is to do a soil test? And if you're intimidated by doing a soil test, I want you to know it's cheapest and fastest to just do this on your own. So we have with us today Agent Andy Kness from the University of Maryland Extension Office, Harford County. And Andy, you're going to teach us what do we need to do a soil test, and we're going to look at exactly how to do this because you can do this.
All right, Joyce. So gardeners, the very first thing you're going to want to do is how do you go from what's in your lawn or in your flower bed to what's in this bag? So it's not as complicated as you might think. The first thing that you want to do is to define areas of your landscape that you want to sample from. So for example, behind us here, we have a flower bed. That could be one area that you want to sample. A flower bed should be sampled at a depth of 8 inches. Now, in front of us, we have the front yard. This would be a separate management area.
And we're going to do that with you in a minute.
This would be
we're going to do this together.
This would be a separate sample. And for a lawn situation, turf, you would sample that at a depth of 4 inches. Say you also had a vegetable garden. That would be a separate sample as well, and you would sample that at a depth of 8 inches as well. So now you know what areas you're going to sample in your yard. Now what tools do you need? So it's really not that complicated. So we have an array of different methods of getting the soil out of the ground and into a bucket to ship to the lab. So first thing you're going to need is a clean plastic bucket, preferably plastic, because if it's metal, it could potentially throw off your soil sample analysis with the corrosive metals and such. The second thing you're going to need is a way to get soil out of the ground and into that bucket. So some of these things you probably already have at your house, some you might not. So everybody probably has a shovel. So this is just your typical garden spade. You could potentially use this to take thin slices at a depth of 4 inches for your lawn or 8 inches for flower beds. Preferably, the most preferred method that is easiest would be to use a soil probe. You can buy these online or at a home and garden center. They're not terribly expensive, but this makes it really easy to just put in the ground, push it down to that depth of either 4 or 8 inches, pull the core out of the ground, put it in your bucket. So now that we have the tools of the trade, the next thing that you're going to do is actually take your samples. You want to take random samples throughout your sample area. So for example, your front yard might be one of your sample areas.
All right, why don't we hold on a second? Let's go out here and show them.
Sure.
Okay, here we are out in the yard, and Andrew already told us that you should have a soil probe or a shovel, but I think a lot of homeowners are thinking of their bulb digger. Can they use a bulb digger, Andy? What do you think?
So, in my opinion, the bulb digger is probably not the best tool for the job. Here you can see a core that was taken with the bulb digger, and these are inch increments. And for a lawn situation, we want to take a sample at 4 inches, and you can see this one's coming up at about 3 inches at best or so, 3.5. So this isn't really getting us deep enough, and this certainly would not get you deep enough in a flower bed or a vegetable garden. So that's probably not your ideal tool. The ideal tool would be a soil probe, and you can see Joyce just put the probe in the ground and she's taking a core out. And here it is. Very easy, wasn't it, Joyce?
Oh, very simple. So I know I need 4 inches, and I happen to have this blade with me. So I've got my 4-inch sample, and I'm going to knock this excess out because I don't want it to fall in the bucket, because we know those lower subsoils are not going to be as nutritious. So I knock them out, and then I'm just going to invert it into my bucket. Boy, that's easy.
So there's one core done.
But the reality is, Andy, most gardeners don't have those. So this is what I do in my yard. I like it when my soil's a little bit moist. I drive my shovel in, I slide it in about 1 inch behind, and I try to pull out my slice. Oh, how nice this would work so perfectly. So here's my sliver that I made, and then I just cut my core, and I take my center, and I'm going to put this in. Now, do I need all this grass and thatch? No. I'm going to pull those pieces off, but I don't want to pull all the, I want to knock the soil off the roots. And so I'm going to put that right into my bucket. So there's the beginning, and I put it in my bucket, and we've got about, how many sites did we mark? Probably 15 in this front yard that we're going to show you again. When we put it in the bucket, we're going to show you what you do with it next, because it's a little bit cheaper to ship dry soil than wet soil. So let's give them a tip in a minute.
Okay, so here we are. Within this bucket is our soil cores and our soil samples that we took from 15 random sites across this entire front yard. It's very important that you take enough samples to put in this bucket, because if you don't take enough, you're not going to get accurate data back from the soil test lab. So we recommend at least 15 samples in your sampling area.
I got a question. Are they testing random spots that are unusual, like puddles and stuff, and unusual locations, or is this just the...
It's a good question. So you want to avoid areas of your yard that are not representative of sort of the average. So, for example, don't take a sample that's right underneath of a tree in the shade, or don't take a sample that's right in the middle of a spot that always lays wet, and don't take a sample right where your dog always urinates.
Oh, good points. Avoid those areas where the pets visit regularly. Yeah. So here we are with all of our core samples. This is what I do. I take them home and dump them on newspaper during the night. I spread it out and I do a nice mix. You have to break up all these clods. Of course, the guy testing does not want sticks, and they don't want any sticks and any kind of rocks that you find. So you're getting rid of those. You're picking out the roots. We're breaking up these clods really small, and I spread it out during the evening hours. And actually, for the next few hours in my house, I'm actually breaking up these clods. Now, in this box is a sample I took last night or yesterday afternoon from my vegetable garden. And as you can see, I've tried to really grind it down so I've got a nice composite mix of all my core. And then, Andy, how much are we sending in that little bag?
So in your bag that you're going to send to the soil test lab, you're going to have about a cup of soil, which is what Joyce has represented here. And the one benefit of drying your soil on newspaper is that you're not actually paying to send water. So it's cheaper to mail that way.
You're cheaper. And how much is the lab really going to use of this to do the test? Because this is the real kicker. You wouldn't believe how little soil they use.
So the soil test lab is basically going to mix your sample once they get it, and they're going to take a couple of grams worth of soil to run your test. So this sample right here from your sample is going to give you information to manage, say, this entire half-acre front yard that we just sampled, which is why it is so very important to do this process correctly and to mix your soil thoroughly in order to get a good data back from the lab.
So good. So they don't use much. And then this is what your lab sheet's going to look like. You're going to fill out a lab sheet, and I put my name and address. They're going to ask you to name your plot. I would suggest that you pick a name for the area that really depicts what it is, because if you're testing a pasture and you're testing a vegetable garden and you're testing a lawn, in the 2 years from now, when you go back to consult this, it's important that you know what particular bed you were really testing. And then they're going to ask you, how deep did you take your test? How fresh it is. You can actually, Andy told me you can hold your test for, a couple weeks. It doesn't matter. You can take some time before you send it.
Just don't rehydrate the soil.
Oh, that's...
Also, do not microwave or oven dry your soil.
Good points. Don't add water or anything special to the mix. And then you choose, now Andy, you're going to have to answer this question. You tell them what kind of crop you're growing. My test is going to be a vegetable that I'm going to mail off. So Andy, tell them why it's important to tell the lab this, because do they even test for nitrogen?
They don't test for nitrogen because nitrogen it changes so many different forms in the soil. However, our nutrient recommendations, especially nitrogen, are dependent on what you're growing. So vegetable garden will have a different nutrient recommendation, and especially nitrogen, than say a grass warm season or cool season grass lawn would.
And you can see the lab sheet lists on here all the different types of gardens. So you have to tell them which one. And then Andy, tell them why it asks on here how frequently or when your most recent Lyme test was. So how many months? You have to wait a long time after you've Lyme, don't you?
Yeah, so they're gonna want to know when the last time you limed was, and reason being is that lime takes a while to react. So they need to factor
Slow.
that into their calculation that they give you from back from the lab, so that you don't end up over liming your lawn or your garden.
So I think we've covered the gist of it. And guess what? You don't have to memorize all this because it's on the University of Maryland website. So just go. University of Maryland, go extension.umd.edu, go to the menu and look up soil testing, and you're going to spend anywhere from $10 to $20 to do this. It's faster for you to do this soil test yourself. And definitely put your email address, because I find they email the answers really quick. So it may look like Greek when you get it and you don't know how to read it. Call your extension office or go to our State of Maryland Extension Ask a Master Gardener sites. You can find the answers there. So there you go, gardeners.